I want to get to Pillar to the Sky, and I want to get
great.
to...
I love talking about this book. Thank you.
Okay, good. So explain to the audience what a space elevator would be.
The concept of a space elevator, the math for it was worked out by Tsiolkovsky, Russian high school teacher, actually, back in around 1905, who also worked out the mathematics of how to get into orbit. The idea is to actually string a pillar from geosynchronous orbit down to the equator.
Was that 22,300?
About 22,000 and several hundred miles.
Okay.
Using carbon nanotubing, C60, for example, which is being developed in the lab and is, in fact, right on the edge of going into commercial product use. Now, I know to many listeners, well, your listeners grab it, but a lot of others, particularly some daytime audiences, don't quite get it.
Okay, so let's keep it easy. Such a structure from the Earth to geosync orbit is just impossible to contemplate from any number of angles. Number one, let us begin with, where would you begin building it? On Earth or in space, or would you begin both simultaneously?
That's the great part of it. Let's look at a different angle. Impossible to conceptualize building it from the Earth's surface out to 22,000 miles. Utterly absurd. The idea is to loft up to geosynchronous orbit a thread made out of carbon nanotube.
Okay.
And then string that thread back down to the equator. Once anchored in place.
By the way, this, folks, is where it's got to be, is at the equator.
It has to be actually, you can build it offline from the equator, but the stress loads start getting a little bit weird.
Right. The engineer's pleasure point is at the equator. Why?
Because the place I picked in my book is Kiribati, perhaps more familiar to many Americans because it's a small island chain nation. One of the islands about 60 miles off the equator is Tarawa, one of the great battlefields of World War II.
Oh, yes.
So if we build it right at the equator, you string a thread from geosynchronous orbit down to the equator, anchor it in place, excuse me, and then the centrifugal force imparted to it by the rotation of the Earth will keep the thread rigid. Very simple example. Take a shoe off, tie your shoelace to it, spin it around, and it will stand out rigid.
Right.
Same thing would work with a space elevator. And once you get that first thread in place,
yes,
in the same way we used to build suspension bridges, you got that first wire across, and then you would attach spinners to it that would just start adding more and more threads and layering it out bigger and bigger. One of the things I came up with, actually, building off other people's work, would be not necessarily would you then be adding more threads, but you would be stitching on something that looked like 35 millimeter film, perforated on either side that you can stitch them together, and then you can be running material up and down the side of that, going up and going down. And the fascinating part of it is it's almost energy free once you get it in place.
How strong are these carbon fibers, nanotech things? How strong potentially? Is there a way you can tell me compared to, I don't know, steel compared to something we know?
Thousands of times stronger than steel, both in compression and extension. And steel simply would not work for this. We need to think of a whole new construction material. Let's look back. The historian in me looks back to the development of mass production of steel via the Bessemer process in the 1860s.
Okay.
Steel, prior to that, was almost as valuable and expensive as silver.
Right.
Weight for weight.
Yes.
Suddenly, Bessemer process is turning out steel at literally just a couple of dollars a ton. We're going to see the same thing happen with nanotube technology and C60 technology. It will become the building material of the 21st century, replacing steel. Look how steel transformed the cityscapes of the world between 1870 up to our current age.
Okay, I vaguely understand nanotubes. I don't know what C60 is.
C60 is one variant on that, and it's easy to pull up for folks. In fact, there's some pretty good stuff, I believe, on Wikipedia about it.
Okay.
It is actually a molecular rearranging of carbon. And it's also referred to sometimes as buckyballs.
Oh,
It's
okay.
Buckminster Fuller, because it looks very similar to Buckminster Fuller's geodesic domes. And we're talking about at the molecular level. When we master stitching those together and being able to turn them out as a wire thread or as a flat film, like old 35-millimeter film, you have the construction material of the future.
Okay. If you can help me out understanding how big this so-called pillar to the sky would have to be to transport whatever it is we plan to transport up to geosync orbit in a way that, let's even back up from that. Right now, what does it cost to launch a pound of something or another into geosync?
You and I have synchronicity here because that was going to be my answer. Currently, to low Earth orbit, no matter how efficient we get with rocket technology, your price is still going to run $1,000 to $3,000 per pound.
Okay, that's low Earth orbit. What about geosync?
Geosynchronous, you can run as high as $100,000 a pound.
$100,000 a pound? Really?
Yeah, it's funny because I was eating at my favorite restaurant here in Black Mountain several hours ago with some friends. We were talking about this.
Mm-hmm.
And in the novel, Pillar to the Sky, one of the people working on deploying the first space elevator has a hankering for some good North Carolina barbecue. Cost of the meal, $7.50. Delivery charge, $100,000. Mm-hmm. But once you have that pillar in place, the cost to get from the Earth's surface to geosynchronous drops to as little as $10 a pound.
$10 a pound. All right. Imagine the structure for me, the pillar, if you will, to get to that efficiency and how big would it be? We're talking about these nanotubes or C60. The final product, how big would it be?
It could go any size we want. In my novel, Pillar to the Sky, we start off by just laying out some threads of sufficient strength to be hauling additional material from the Earth's surface up to geosync. The math works out that laying out that first wire is going to cost into the tens of billions of dollars.
Tens of billions. All right.
But once you got the first wires in place, then you can use that to haul up
everything else.
Thousands of tons of construction material to make a pillar of any size you wish. In other words, it's like laying out the first railroad across the United States. Cost a ton of money for that time. But once it was built, then it became very inexpensive to haul hundreds of thousands of tons of rail to make additional rails that were even bigger, stronger, more efficient than the first transcontinental railroad.
I get it. But can you estimate for me something that would be efficient enough to take up the kind of weight that you just talked about? How big might it be, do you think?
It would run, you mean in terms of size?
Yes. If we were standing back and looking at it, how big would the thing be? And would it be different sizes at different points where there might be different stresses or something?
Within the Earth's atmosphere, and particularly in the area of the Earth's atmosphere where we have weather, you would want something that was more beefed up. Gotcha. Once you're beyond the Earth's atmosphere, you can start thinning it out. And to get to that first step of efficient use, to be able to haul things up, I'm looking at a 20-ounce bottle of soda on my table right now. That's about the diameter.
Wow. All right. My next question is this. I'm trying to envision how you would get the first thread of nanotubes or whatever from geosync to Earth. Would you
That's the challenge.
I'm sure it is, but there has to be a way to envision that challenge before this becomes realistic. In other words, I don't know, I take a nice fishing weight, attach it to my nanotube, and I start dropping and dropping and dropping and dropping. But that's probably not going to work, right?
Again, it's like you and I have a synchronistic link tonight, a Vulcan mind meld, if you will, because that's how I envision it. It would be the equivalent.
Seriously?
Yes. You have a weight that is rocket powered, and you guide it down. It's like a contest. I can remember as a kid where you had like a fishing pole with a line on it, and you had to drop it down through like a little hole to pick up a prize or something.
I remember those.
You'd
yes.
find down at the boardwalk. So basically the same thing. You're dropping it from geosync down to the Earth's surface. The tricky part will be the last 100 miles, but once anchored...
All right, hold it right there. We're at a 2-minute break here, so take a deep breath, and we'll be right back. Professor Forstchen is my guest. I'm Art Bell, and you know what this is, right? Midnight in the desert. Think about it. A space elevator, pillar to the sky. And at the moment, we're talking about something he probably didn't expect to be talking about when he came on the program, and that is a space elevator, a pillar, if you will, title of his book, to the sky. And strangely, it's coincidental. You know, I've got a gigantic array of books. You just cannot imagine, Professor. And so every now and then I'll wander over and I'll just look for something I haven't read to read. Came on your book and said, yeah, baby, this is the one. So as I mentioned, I'm right in the middle of it. So I don't know the whole story, and that's why I kind of wanted to talk about the space elevator.
I'm delighted to be talking about it.
All right, good. So we were talking about getting the thread from geosync down to Earth, and you were mentioning you'd have a rocket, and I wonder why you need a rocket. If you're up at geosync, what gravity would not be enough, I take it, to pull my fishing weight down?
Initially, no. But as we transition in closer to Earth, of course, the effect of gravity increases. The tough part of the maneuver is the last 100,000 feet, because
really?
Now you're dealing with wind, atmosphere, potential storms, and part of the drama in my book is they're dealing with the potential of thunderstorms in the area.
Of course.
They're doing the final descent down to the surface of the
Yeah,
Earth.
well, of course. When you're at the equator, you're going to have thunderstorms.
Yeah. And let me throw in, that's another reason why you want it at the equator, because the equator is all but free of hurricanes.
Yes, that's true. But thunderstorms, oh, baby. I lived in Manila for years, and we're 15 degrees off or so. And let me tell you, it rips and it snorts every night.
Sure does.
Really severe stuff. So there would be that to contend with.
And another reason I chose Kiribati out in the middle of the Pacific is security. Now, the equator goes across Africa, goes across South America, but it goes across some nations where it could be a number one target for terrorists.
Wow.
So you want an island nation out in the Pacific for your first pillar because of security issues as well.
How about a Japan Airlines 777 bumping into it? What do you have then?
You'd have a plane that would go down, and until the pillar was of sufficient strength, it could possibly sever it, possibly. Chances are, though, a wing hit, it would just shear the wing off. It would shake the pillar. The plane would go down, but the pillar would survive. That is how strong C-60 or buckyballs or nanotubing is.
All right. Now, down to brass tacks here, as it were. Do we have enough nanotubes or enough C-60 or enough of whatever it's going to take to actually do this yet?
When I first proposed the book, it was back, it was around 2010, 2011. The initial reaction in the team I was coordinating with NASA was, hey, Bill, that stuff is still 20, 30 years out.
Uh-huh.
And just in the last 3 or 4 years, there's been tremendous strides, and we're now up to manufacturing potentially up to, last time I checked, definitely centimeter length. It will soon be going to millimeter length, and once you get that, it's like making steel wire in the 19th century.
Wow.
Think about it. Steel wire really did not exist several hundred years back, except in very short lengths. It was difficult and expensive to make. And then it started getting mass-produced. Once you start mass-producing this material, you can weave it to whatever you want.
Okay.
All
right. Try this for me, Professor. I'm imagining something like a shuttle trip. We don't have shuttle trips anymore, but some kind of spacecraft would go to geosync orbit and would fire this rocket you spoke of, pretty much straight down, I guess.
Yes.
And this thing would go flying down into the atmosphere. The normal, it would be going fast, as in reentry fast?
No, not at all.
No, not at all. Okay.
The figures I looked at, the descent from geosync down to the Earth's surface would take about 10 days. You'd have a reel of this that would be gradually unrolling. You're not going fast. You're pulling it out at a rate of maybe about 100 miles an hour. And you keep it controlled, letting it out slowly all the way down to the Earth's surface. The rocket actually would serve to boost it down, but also as a retro rocket. And those final mile or so descent to the anchor point. You have a pre-assembled anchor point that you lock your cable into. Once locked in place.
What do you mean? Where would that be? Are you talking about the ground?
Right at the equator. Yes.
Right at the okay. So this rocket would, one way or the other, get it all the way to the ground.
Correct. And the key thing is you have a locking system there that it is attached to. It's been assembled, prior to even beginning to send the material up into space.
Right.
And then once you have that platform with the cable locked to it, then you add spinners onto it the way they used to spin cable on suspension bridges. And those spinners just keep going up and down the cable, taking a couple of weeks for each journey, weaving more and more layers onto it to make it stronger and stronger. Once that first thread is in place, you got your stairway to the heavens.
How much time would be involved? Let's say you've got the first thread in place.
Yes.
From that point to usability, how long?
5 to 10 years.
Well, that's a lot of work.
Well, we remember Jack Kennedy making a challenge in May of 1961, and not much more than 8 years later, we were on the surface of the moon.
Good point.
It would be a mega project, same way Hoover Dam or the building of the interstate highways. There was a time when America embraced mega projects. This is a mega project for America for the 21st century.
I guess we could almost call it a mega structure.
Yes, it would be the ultimate mega structure.
For us.
Actually, to start, because once you're up there, think about going to Mars. What's the cost of going to Mars right now?
Escaping Earth orbit, pretty much.
Right. Haul your material. Once you have that cable viable, you haul your equipment up via the cable, assemble your Mars-bound spaceship, and your energy cost is but a fraction because what you are actually using, centrifugal force imparted by the Earth's atmosphere to fling your craft towards Mars with just a slight extra boost for escape velocity from Earth's gravity.
Yeah, what do they say when you're in Earth orbit? You're pretty much halfway to anywhere.
Right.
That's where all the big bucks are spent, getting up out of the atmosphere.
And once you're at geosync, you're well over 90% of the way out there.
This just seems like such a good idea. Poke holes in your idea. Major
problem, orbital material, because all objects in orbit cross the equator twice in each orbit.
Uh-huh.
Think of a polar orbit launch.
Oh, you're talking about like space junk, that kind of stuff?
Everything from that glove that one of the astronauts had floated out of his spacecraft to, I believe, there's a camera floating up there.
Oh, yeah.
From nuts and bolts to entire booster rockets that are in space. In fact, a couple of years back, a Swiss firm actually did make a proposal. We'll start cleaning up the space junk for a price.
A price?
Yeah, if essentially become garbage collectors in space, taking care of the material that's out there. It will be expensive, and we're going to have to control the traffic. The traffic in space, there's about 15 to 20,000 objects in orbit right now, of which only a fraction are viable operational satellites. Most of them are dead or debris from launches or systems breaking apart.
Yeah, because our space elevator is not just at geosync. It's going all the way down. So it is subject to virtually that whole line, right?
Correct.
And
that will be
these objects coming around in orbit, the junk you talked about, typically moving at what kind of speeds?
Well, remember the movie Gravity. Now, they played a lot with some of the science of orbital mechanics and gravity, but it still was a heck of a great film.
It was.
My fiancée and I watched it on a cruise ship that was going through some stormy weather. And so the whole theater was going up and down 15 to 20 feet, and people were getting sick. I loved it.
Yeah. I do well in those situations, too. So
you have to clean up the space junk.
Yeah. So you really would have to go up there and garbage collect.
Yes.
If a glove, Professor, hit your space pillar to the sky, that would be enough to fracture it?
Potentially, particularly in the opening stage of construction. But it's another reason, while working on the book and some of the new research coming out, I myself was moving from the concept of a thread to something that looks like 35 millimeter film. That if need be, you can turn sideways, or you stitch 50, 20, 100 of these films together. You have a structure that's 10, 20, 30 meters wide. Yes, a glove could damage it, but the rest of the structure will survive.
Mm-hmm. What about one of Ronald Reagan's satellites sitting up there protecting it with lasers?
That is a very serious consideration. That's most likely what we'll be doing as well. But, one of the hard math things I had to work out was to try and figure out the math of having an object the width of a soda bottle, how many objects would impact it in a given year. And one study I saw from some years back indicated about every 5 to 7 years, you're going to have a problem.
Oh.
You're going to have a near flyby or a potential hit.
Well, if we want to stay in space, it seems to me that the movie Gravity should serve up a perfect warning that we damn well better clean it up first.
Absolutely, yes, because I know you, without doubt, recall one of the shuttle missions came back, and they're staring at the forward cockpit windshield, and there's one heck of a deep gouge in it.
Uh-huh.
And it turned out they figured it was a bolt that was floating around up there. And remember, low Earth orbit velocity is 17,000 miles per hour, and you're intersecting the kinetic energy. It could have wiped out a shuttle, a simple bolt.
Wow. Do they have adequate, since we're on the subject, take the space station. Do they have adequate warning of stuff coming their way? Are we watching that closely, or could they be surprised, unhappily?
The potential is there. We've been lucky. There's been some near incidents. I believe one object passed within 50 or 100 meters of it a couple of years back. But again, the difference between the space station and a pillar is, of course, the space station is in orbit itself.
Yes.
So it's sort of like moving down the interstate highway with all the traffic moving along with it. So not much of a problem. But if you have a thread sticking up on that interstate highway, you are going to have a problem sooner or later.
All right, let's take on the subject material in Gravity for just a second. The working hypothesis there was that somebody, Chinese or whoever it is, blow up a satellite, And by the way, there has been a lot of that going on, or some of it going on, I know, just to prove that they could blow up a satellite.
Right.
Now you have lots of pieces and bolts and stuff. And what they theorized was a sort of a chain reaction. Isn't that possible?
It is possible, not to the degree that we saw in the movie. It made a heck of a good movie.
Yeah.
And I loved it. I think it was beautifully filmed, particularly that scene when she gets into the capsule and she turns the air back on.
Oh, yeah.
That put me in tears, but they played a bit fancy with the math behind it. Yes, there is that possibility. But remember, again, it's like traffic moving on an interstate. As long as you're not a drunk driver going the other way, the car next to you going 80 miles an hour, you're just simply cruising alongside of each other.
Pretty much. But, I mean, if you blow up something, that weighs a lot, then you get a lot of little pieces, and they're all on their own trajectories and yet orbiting at the same time. So it's like a shotgun blast.
Absolutely, yes. As well demonstrated in that movie, where a nearby satellite was destroyed and suddenly you had debris coming at the space station and suddenly everything starts to get torn apart.
And the next pass is worse because it's hit another satellite or two by then and so forth.
Yeah. Though there was some math being played with there in terms of the time it took the debris to circle the Earth and come back and hit things again.
They were kind of sticking to 90 minutes, weren't they?
But remember, the targets that were going to be hit are also moving in Earth orbit as well.
True.
In different planes. But nevertheless, I love the movie, and I think it would help generate interest again in the space program.
This first story I read tonight, that may definitely get the program on the move again. If we really think there's somebody else out there, Professor, I think that just might fire up the American people to the point that they say, you know what? We better do it, and we better do it first.
Recall in the 50s, with all the talk about flying saucers and everything else, and then the Russians putting up Sputnik, that was a major drive for people to be looking up and saying, we got to get up there too.
Yes.
And when Apollo shut down, I was such a fan of the movie 2001. We're talking about looking 30 years in the future because of the movie Back to the Future and its state today. But back when 2001 came out, I assumed, hey, by the time I get to be 50, that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be on the moon. We're going to be going as far as Saturn.
Oh, I thought that too. I thought that too. I'm so disappointed.
Yeah.
It might take a story like this to get confirmed, to get us on the move again. It would take something at that level, I think, to do it, because otherwise, short of your pillar to the sky economically, there are not reasons enough, in their opinion, to do it.
One of the main factors I wrote in the Pillar of the Sky was it solves the energy crisis once and for all. Because once you got the pillar, what's the product you can ship back down? Put out solar panels, collect energy, and then you have them hardwired. One of the beauties of some of the carbon nanotubing we're looking at is they can be superconductive as well.
Ooh, really?
Yes.
So in other words, the energy you collect, you could then send to Earth with virtually no loss.
We see talk all the time about the idea of putting up solar panels. In fact, just about a week ago, didn't the Japanese talk about orbiting, putting them around the moon or something? No environmental group on this planet is going to stand still for massive microwave beaming or laser beaming of energy back down to the Earth's surface.
Yeah.
It just ain't going to happen.
I know.
You need a hard wire. You need a space elevator to do it.
And as you pointed out, it would be made of material that would conduct it without loss to speak of, yes?
Yes.
God, that's exciting. All of this is so exciting. What happened to us anyway?
We seem to have lost our will in the last 30 to 40 years. This belief that Jack Kennedy, remember, his challenge was, why are we going to do it? because we're Americans and we can do it.
Uh-huh.
That's all we need. That's all we need to go.
Oh, we're still Americans. Yeah, we're still Americans, but we just don't have that. I don't know. We don't have that will, and I hate to say it, but maybe we need Trump, somebody just a wild man up there.
Or for that matter,
I mean, he'd just order it. Get the damn thing built now. We know how to make big buildings. Build it.
Look to what I hate when history books refer to them as the robber barons. Look at the Carnegies, the Mellons, and others of the 1870 Edison. It's like, okay, I got the capital, I got the ability, I got the knowledge. Yeah. I'm going to wire this country with electricity.
Well, he could call it the Trump pillar.
Oh, then that would sell him on the idea. We got to give the guy a call. Listen, if you win, we got an idea for another bill for you.
All right. Well, I think it's a wonderful idea. I especially love the whole prospect of getting that first fiber down.
Yes.